I want to jump to this Twitter thread from Jeff Morris Jr. at JMJ. He's managing partner at Chapter 1. And he writes at The New Internet, former VP of Product at Tinder, VP of Product and Revenue. He says, the TikTok war, why high school and college kids are getting the wrong information about Hamas and Israel. He said, I spent the weekend trying to reverse engineer the TikTok algorithm, as I am convinced this is the reason we are losing the information war with high school and college students. One red flag was seeing San Francisco high school students who were aggressively anti-Israel and asking myself where they were getting their news. Their protests happened right after the fake New York Times headline that accused Israel of the hospital bomb. I also want to pause real quick as well. The Wall Street Journal maintains that the video we see of the rocket exploding in midair and payload falling was what hit the parking lot. The New York Times got the story wrong, apologized, and then came out with another story being like, actually, that video you watched was wrong. Our analysis says that's actually not what hit the hospital. And it's like very convenient for the New York Times, who flubbed this one really, really bad, to be like, actually, we weren't that wrong. So I think the New York Times is full of it. I think the New York Times is a captured organization that is desperately trying to be pro-Hamas. We saw this with the Tom Cotton op-ed. The op-ed editor got fired because Tom Cotton wrote an op-ed about sending the military because of the BLM riots. Yeah. So New York Times, we've known for a long time. Look what Barry Weiss had to say. It is a captured leftist institution. Yeah. Let's read. He says the bigger red flag was seeing 51% of Americans aged 18 to 24 believe Hamas. Terrorists who raped and murdered innocent women and children believe Hamas was justified. My high school classmates who lived through 9/11 would never believe this. That's right. Look at this. You guys seen this chart? He's this graph is actually missing one other important component. Not only do 18 to 24 year olds in the majority believe it was justified, but in the majority believe it was genocide. So I believe it's 63% of 18 to 24 year olds believe what Hamas did was genocide, and 51% believe it is justified. That is insane. Wow. Let's read more. He says, why do high school students in San Francisco hate Israel so much? I'd assume very few of them have been to Israel, let alone have a fully formed view of a multi-generational conflict. They're 16 years old and live in California. Let's be serious for a minute. Really? For Gen Z, TikTok is the new search engine. It's the number one search engine for more than half of Gen Z. It's the primary news source for many younger demos. And while we have justifiable concerns about the New York Times and mainstream media, this has become a TikTok war. When I discovered through data and user testing, what I have discovered is extremely concerning and I believe requires more attention, as this is an actual national security issue. When I engaged with one post on TikTok supporting opposing views, my entire feed became aggressively anti-Israel. It was as if I was placed in an A/B test variant and was told to see this war with Israel being the evil side. As I looked at the tactics and data, I saw that much of TikTok is being controlled by anti-Israel bot farms, paid commenters, likers, sharers, much of which is paid for by Hamas supporting organizations. I then looked at the data and saw that Israel is losing the TikTok war by a long shot. As an example, the top 3 billion top hashtag is 3 billion views for Palestine versus 200 million for Israel. If you look at the other hashtags, it is clear that Israel has a distribution issue. So he goes on a bit, but you get the point. He says he's still researching. I actually think the point is this. China is trying to get the U.S. into multiple wars at once. And the purpose of this is get the U.S. into war in Ukraine, in the Mediterranean, and itself. This is going to create a massive conflict in the U.S. Look what we're seeing with Cooper Union yesterday. Ron Coleman made a really important point. A video of Jewish students locked in the library as far leftists are banging on the door screaming Free Palestine. And the latest reporting that came out is that I believe it was the librarian, told these students to hide in the attic. I kid you not.
Wow.
Now I'm wondering what attic is in the building, and if they're just saying that because it's like invoking some serious images. But how does something like that happen where these are just some Jewish students in New York, and Ron Coleman says they're not Israeli students?
Right.
That's right. The leftists did not go to the room where Israelis were. They went to the room where the Jewish students were banging on the door and screaming Free Palestine. They don't see a distinction. So I actually think this is, hey, it's TikTok. It's China. And we get these doofy Republicans who are like, they're spying on us. No, dude, they're manipulating young people. Hey, we're banned on TikTok. I wonder why that is.
Me too.
You're on TikTok a lot, you said before the show. Is this what you're seeing too?
I am on TikTok.
Oh, sorry. Did I just expose you?
No. I am on TikTok. I got banned a couple times. Carly Bonet, who helps push war room stuff, she's been banned like 25 times. We just started a war room one, and it's they ban war room all the time. Anything that is I guess any of that. So
and you don't really scroll through it yourself. You just use it for war room.
I have my own personal one too.
Yeah. Are you seeing it in your algorithm? I'm wondering. I'm asking because
totally.
if it's complete takeover or if it's targeted to young people.
Yeah, it is. It's a takeover. And I see even in the live streams, they have like, the live whatevers. It's all pro-Palestine, like just like it, all of it.
I've wondered, and I can't remember who made this point in the past week that I've been on IRL, that one of the things that happened post 9/11 was that to avoid encouraging an anti-Islam, anti-Muslim sentiment, textbook companies partnered with organizations that are pro-Islam, and there's an influence there.
I believe it almost, and it could be part of the algorithm, but like if I watch one, video about like, this is what's really happening, and it's that I'll just see all those
keep
videos.
Going.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder
really
if students are particularly vulnerable because of this precaution that was potentially taken when they were publishing textbooks post 9/11, in addition to the fact that it's being pushed on them on social media. So there's no narrative, right? If you, I felt like this. I grew up in a liberal blue area, and I always leaned conservative. And I remember there were times in school where you're being taught something, but you're reading something different at home. The conversations are different among your family. You can kind of, to question it. Whereas if it's hitting you from social media, which is basically how you run your entire after school life, maybe in school too, and your teachers are presenting information that says, actually this is how this conflict started, and, this side gets this wrong and whatever. If there is no escape, if there's no way for them to see on the outside, unless they have family in Israel, unless they have a connection somewhere else.
I have only seen pro Hamas type videos on TikTok.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised with the college stuff, because I think they were all primed for this after the riot summer with BLM, and this is just like an extension of that. So they see violence as righteous.
And they were young. If you're a high school student now in 2020, if you're 17 now, you were 13. That's like the end of middle school, and so you grew up in a time where social media and really outlandish protests that verge on the point of destruction and violence are the norm, and perhaps even celebrated. That it was cool that all of your friends, older siblings, were getting likes for attending these things and throwing bricks through windows or whatever else.
It's the Cultural Revolution. It's the Red Guard.
Yeah, and they've been waiting. They've been waiting to have their chance to have something big to protest about.
To want violence, right? Even though it's the same crowd that says silence is violence or words are violence.
These are, Will Chamberlain pointed out, these are people who cheered, not every single one, but in New York City, cheered for Hamas, and are now, because of what's going on in Maine, arguing to disarm people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
It seems wild.
They hate their political enemies. And they have no moral center, and they'll say whatever they have to do to destroy their political enemies.
How about Hamas breaks through the barriers, paraglides in, murders a bunch of civilians and men, women, and children, and then Israel strikes Gaza. When Hamas storms in, what do we see? We see people in New York City cheering for the killing of civilians. Then when Israel bombs Palestine, we see these people saying, they bomb Gaza, they say, oh no, they're killing civilians, and they're crying and saying, how could you support this? And I'm just like, bro, you were supporting it.
Yeah. It's okay when it happens to someone else's civilians.
Gaza, Israel, people, okay? Like I'm not Israel or Palestine or whatever. All I know is people are dying. But y'all were celebrating civilians dying, and now you're complaining about civilians dying. I don't think you actually care about civilians dying.
Right.
No, I don't think so either. I think there's also a level of, one of the things that I have heard told over and over again is that one of the reasons people say you should support Palestine, support Hamas or whatever, is because they're being colonized, right? They're the colonizer oppressing them. And this is actually very similar to the language that we hear with BLM and with other...
It's critical race theory.
Right, exactly. And so if all of our young people are trained sort of a la Pavlov and his dog, that when they hear a certain word, they know exactly how they're supposed to respond. They know how to fall in line. Right. If you hear colonizer, you know which side you're supposed to be on, because in our history, which is the only lens they're allowed to, they can view it through. And part of that, I would say, is probably immaturity, right? It's they haven't experienced the world. They don't know anything. But also, they are only ever allowed to hear certain terms and line up on certain sides.
It's all indoctrination. I
Right.
mean, you go back to Japanese Korean culture, like way back when. I mean, Japanese colonized Korea. I mean, there's colonizers everywhere.
So would the modern day teenager be on Korea's side?
That's a good question. I haven't thought about that.
That's the word they hear. And
I haven't thought about that.
That's how they know how to line up. I think part of it is that there's not a lot of critical analysis. They just want to have the viral moment. And again, I've said this before, but that story about the student who wrote Black Lives Matters, however many times on his college application and got admitted to whatever Ivy League. Like, these kids are going to present their TikToks being like, I got every one of my school to dance in the pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas rally. And so I'm very, very important and you should let me into your school. Like, this is what they think will build their potential activist future on, which is linked to both their social value and their intellectual value.
The views of these students will never change. I mean, in small numbers, for sure, people do change, but what people need to understand about generations is that when we see, according to Pew Research, Gen Z being slightly more conservative than millennials in some areas, they assume this means that Gen Z is learning these things, when in reality, it's just conservatives have more kids. More kids are being raised. These young people who are chanting from the river to the sea, it's locked in. They've chanted it. They've said it. It's part of who they are. And it will be painful to admit they were wrong. Only some people ever have the strength to actually go through these transformations and be like, what was I thinking? Yeah. Most of them, when they're in their 30s, are going to be part of extremist groups in some fashion or another.
This is why, we were talking last time about Marxism and in the college world. And then, I'm thinking of like domestic terrorists such as the Weather Underground, literally blowing people up, and they're avowed Marxists. They're very open about it. They eventually go to jail. People like Bill Ayers or Susan Rosenberg. Susan Rosenberg gets pardoned by Bill Clinton on his last day in office. She becomes a professor. She's espousing all those things. They all are. They eventually, even my beloved Cuomo, mass murderer in New York, let out on his last day in office a Weather Underground person who built a bomb and killed people. They take over the colleges. There's a lot of them. They breed this world where they talk about how Marxism will be the paradise for people. But anyway, Susan Rosenberg, what does she do other than being a professor? She starts 1,000 Currents and then Act Blue. What does Act Blue do? They help siphon the money for Black Lives Matter, which in my opinion is another domestic terrorist organization. So it's like, I just see a straight line through all of this where that's the kind of violence those campuses breed.
I think Veritas had a report, I want to be very careful with my language here, alleging that China was funneling money to political parties through Act Blue. I'm not entirely sure what the reporting was, but
I wouldn't be surprised.
I wouldn't be surprised either.
Yeah.
I think that was a big story. I just don't have it pulled
I
up in
wouldn't
front
be
of me.
surprised if through colleges. A lot of colleges rely, especially small colleges, rely on foreign donations to make their quotas at the end of the year.
Yeah.
I mean, you have so many foreign students from China, just
Didn't
at
we
the
have
universities.
professors during COVID getting arrested for ties to China for certain things? I forget, it was
I can't remember
espionage
that
or what they were
story.
doing, or there was like some guy with a suitcase and viruses in it. I mean, it was crazy stuff was going on back then.
You have to send me a link because I don't know that one.
Yeah, that's a deep cut from like 3 years ago.
I mean, that was the thing about COVID, though. There was both so much happening. Serge
No, I remember that. You're talking about like there was a person that was traveling with like
Viruses
other
you shouldn't
experimental
have.
viruses. Yeah,
Yes.
right. And they somehow like fell out because they were carrying them in some way that would made it like it was
Right.
very sketchy.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
They
Totally remember that as well.
fell out or
Real
they
quick,
fell
fact check.
out.
It's O'Keefe Media Group, 4 months ago. FEC story update, Chinese money involved in Act Blue donations. Is exactly what it said.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Chinese money's everywhere.
And Xi's the new Mao, and Mao's Cultural Revolution, and Bill Ayers and Weather Underground look up to Mao. I see that as the poison that's destroying this country.
I think one of the problems we have is children are being raised by children and now by algorithms, and adults want to be children. Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.